Good Friday morning. Welcome to the River's Edge Studios at Mr. Small's Theater in Millvale, Pennsylvania. I'm Matt Gike, and this is my show. It's Gike's Got Game, the final show for August. In some ways, you could say it's the final show of the summer, which makes me very sad. August has always made me unsettled at the very least, even though I haven't been in school for, 12 years now? I guess we'll call it 11. I still get that uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach because summer's coming to an end and it's time to get back down to business. That's not really the case in adult life. In fact, I've probably worked harder in the summer than I have in any other time of the year, spring and summer, I would say, since I entered the professional sphere, at least in sports media. The summer has been definitely the time to grind and all that. So it's weird how that feeling still persists, but it does, and it comes with the changing of the seasons. Yesterday was a very fall-like day here in Pittsburgh. So, yeah, things are turning over. And, well, I hope you don't turn over in terms of chasing some other programming on this Friday morning for the next hour. Again, this is my weekly show. It's not really sports radio in a stereotypical sense. And if you've watched or listened over the years, you know that by now. I like to go a little deeper, or in some cases, zoom way out and look at the big picture and how sports fits into the culture at large. This will be my final show until after the Labor Day weekend. I should let you know I'm headed on a 10-day trip to Europe. My wife and I are going on a 10-year anniversary journey across the Atlantic Ocean, so I will not be talking to you next Friday, so I'll try to get everything out that I have to say, at least in the summer portion of the schedule for the next 50 minutes or so. Again, you can find me on Facebook. In fact, if you're watching right now, that's where you are watching, is on Facebook, at Matt Gike Media, is where you can find that URL. And I'm at Matt Gike, G-A-J-T-K-A is how you spell that last name. I'll be happy to visit the land of my ancestors. In fact, next week we'll be spending a couple of days in Poland. I'll be able to ask around and say, why did you spell it this way? Because it's caused me a lot of trouble in some ways in communicating with people over the phone. And in real life over the years. How do you say that name? Maybe I should have changed it for a stage name at some point, but at this stage of the game, I'm sticking with it. And it'll be fun to go over to Poland. It'll be fun to go over to Hungary, to Austria, to Germany. So that's all coming up. And my second trip over to Europe, and looking forward to that very much. Not for reasons of escapism necessarily, but I think we can all learn from experiencing different cultures, and I've often talked about the European influence on sports that I watch, hockey, soccer especially. I think that's only broadened my horizons. I think that's made me a better person to try to appreciate where people are coming from and to appreciate these great athletes, and in some cases coaches and people in leadership positions who make the journey over to America, and appreciate the courage it takes to go outside of your native land, outside of your native tongue. I know I'll be experiencing that kind of anxiety and consternation. I don't know German very well. I know a few words in Polish. I don't know anything in Hungarian. So, it'll be interesting to experience life from that side of it. We all take it for granted here in America, I think, a lot. I know I do, that we can all speak the language of choice here. Not always the case when you are in the world of sports. And like I said, particularly in the sports of hockey and soccer, these worldly games. Golf increasingly is an international sport. Tennis, another sport that I like to watch and partake in myself. That's another one where the United Nations is well represented when it comes down to, say, a Grand Slam tournament like we're going to see in the U.S. Open in just a few days. It'll open up in Flushing Meadows, New York. But that's not really what I'm going to talk about. At least that's not the majority of the content on today's show. And again, thank you for joining me. I mentioned it at the top. We're going into fall, and as you experience sports media right now, whether it be legacy media, TV, radio, if you still read the newspaper, that's still a thing, or online entities, you're being bombarded right now with the start of football season, American football, of course, and high school football season started, in fact, last night in a lot of places. My alma mater of Weirton Madonna back in West Virginia, they got going. I believe they played Bridgeport of Ohio, and they won, so good for them. College football will begin for some teams this weekend, for most next weekend, and then the pros in a couple of more weeks. And if you're a Pittsburgh sports fan, you're probably a Steelers fan too, and you're probably aware of all this. You don't have to have me inform you of this fact that football is on the horizon, and in some ways, with the preseason underway, it's already there. This all leads me to wonder, with the saturation of football, I think it's still as big of a sport here as any sport is anywhere. And it'd be tough to dispute that at this point with TV ratings, with the number of clicks that are generated from football and fantasy football. Let's not forget that aspect of it. But I've felt conflicted for the past several years. And in fact, it came to a head in 2014 with the Ray Rice domestic violence incident. I felt conflicted about being a consumer of football and perpetuating the football industrial complex, if you want to call it that. It might sound dramatic, but I think that's an accurate characterization of what's going on here. When I participate in the football discussion, I continue to churn over that that wheel that keeps turning, the wheel of content 24/7. And football used to be a 5-month-a-year sport, right? And then ESPN and NFL Network realized about 10 years ago, well, why does it have to be that case? We can keep talking about these storylines. We can generate storylines in a lot of cases for 12 months, and that'll perpetuate a higher ratings return because people love, it turns out, to talk about football year-round. Not necessarily me. I think for everything there is a season. But for a lot of you out there, you've enjoyed that aspect of it, where a sport becomes a 12-month-a-year thing as opposed to having seasons and having these dividing lines. So maybe it's even naive or old-fashioned to me to talk about football season beginning when really it's never ended. For the past 10 years, it feels like it hasn't. But there are some troublesome things regarding football. And I mentioned domestic violence with Ray Rice and how that whole situation was handled. I ended up boycotting the NFL, not to be dramatic, but I just felt sickened by my participation in it as just a viewer. I don't comment on it very often. I don't tweet about it very often. I don't watch it very often outside of Steelers games, as it turns out, over the past 5 or 6 years. That's how my viewing habits have changed. And life changes. As we've talked about in the past, that'll dictate your consumption of sports. But this year, with the Urban Meyer situation in Columbus at Ohio State University, with him basically getting a slap on the wrist for not being aware or lying about his awareness of one of his assistant coaches being a purported domestic abuser. With the continued, in some ways, frustratingly slow-paced move of the Journey to Enlightenment on CTE and on long-term effects of football on players, their bodies and their brains, most specifically. With the way that our current president has used the NFL as a talking point here to divide the country into us versus them, right? When in fact, what Colin Kaepernick did a couple of years ago to get this anthem protest thing off the ground, it was meant to raise awareness, not disrespect anybody. And I realize that everyone feels different ways about that, but that part of it has pushed me away from football too, that it can't just be about the sport. It's got to be about talking points, both conservative and liberal. It's all too much. And I feel like I might be better served just taking a full step back and saying, this fall, what if I just went sans football? What if I just avoided all football-related content? And I think I've done a pretty good job of that so far, outside of the incidental contact with radio shows, with some podcasts that I listen to that may talk about all sports. We're seeing some news items scroll past on Twitter or on Facebook. For the most part, 3 weeks into preseason, and preseason almost feels just as big as the regular season these days, but I feel like I've done a pretty good job so far. I haven't watched a single down of football on television. I know that. I haven't watched a single replay of anything, and it hasn't even been conscious. So maybe I'm just getting there without that conscious effort to, quote-unquote, boycott football. And I don't mean to besmirch the sport of football. I find the sport of football actually rather fascinating. I love the chess match. I love the tactics, the X's and the O's. When I used to work at DK Pittsburgh Sports, my favorite guy to talk to during football season was Chris Carter, because he did such a wonderful job of analyzing things from both the Steelers' perspective and the opponent's perspective, and the game planning and the preparation that goes into it, the film study. If X happens, then Y happens, the cause and effect, the push and pull. I love that. And that's part of the reason why I enjoy sport generally speaking. And especially that's part of the reason why I like team sports is that you have that coaching aspect and players synergistically connecting, or in some cases, trying to prevent the other team from synergistically connecting. I find all that fascinating. It's almost like war games in a way, and I'll admit that much. And football, in and of itself, is meant to be a war game, right? Because you take territory and you penetrate into the opponent's backfield. That's meant to be a war metaphor. That was a war metaphor, at least at the very start. And perhaps it was used by some people, maybe behind the scenes, but for some people overtly, as preparation for war. And we've also heard college football coaches and pro football coaches, somewhat insufferably, but still talking about how they feel that football has made America uniquely tough in this way. And there was a really good counterpoint to that posted by Tim Layden of Sports Illustrated yesterday. I suggest you go find that one, where he says that football doesn't have the market cornered on generating toughness or character. And I've always said that too. There is no exclusivity for making people or young people in specific tougher or more resilient. Football can do that, but so can anything. So can very many endeavors. So can playing chess. So can cross-country running. Maybe in some cases, individual sports can do that more than team sports, because you really discover what you are made of when you have to push the envelope and go to that next level. I've always argued for that, and I think Tim Layden made a great argument too in Sports Illustrated there. So that's what leads me to want to take a step back from football. Football doesn't need me to talk about it, and I don't really find myself seeking it out much anymore. So why not just back completely out of it? And even though it might be an easy target these days, and even though you can easily get a concussion playing, for instance, rugby or hockey or even soccer, a sport that for some might seem milquetoast and benign, headers and rising up to try to win an aerial ball, that can lead to some nasty collisions, and whether it be goalkeepers or players who are out in the field. It's been proven, especially from a women's soccer perspective, that concussions can be a very prominent part of that sport, just as much or even more so than tackle football in that way. So it's not just the concussion thing. It's not just the insertion of politics into this sphere and how certain politicians, I'm looking at you in the White House, Mr. Trump, are using the sport to get applause lines at rallies. I'm not just talking about all that. But in general, it's all too much for me. It's all overwhelming. And honestly, I have plenty of things to keep myself occupied. Hockey in the fall and winter, and even into the spring and summer. Soccer year-round, basically, with my gig working for the Riverhounds here in town. That takes up spring and summer and part of fall. And watching soccer overseas, that's a fall and winter and spring thing too. I love baseball, so that'll take care of the warm weather months and well into the fall, in fact, through the end of the World Series. It's not like I need something to keep myself occupied. I'm definitely more into golf these days, both watching and playing, than I have in the past. And I have a family. I have a young son at home. Fall weekends are pretty valuable time. Weekends, generally speaking, are valuable time. So all these reasons are reasons why I want to give it a shot and take the fall off from football and see if I miss it at all, and see if, especially in a city like Pittsburgh that is so driven by pro football and those narratives in the fall and in the winter, and well, people are hoping deep into the winter, right, with the type of team that the Steelers have. It'll be challenging, no doubt, to try to back out of that this year, but that might make it more of a fun challenge. And sure, I'll miss certain things. I'll miss the give and take. I'll miss some of the talk radio stuff, even though I rail against some of the sports talk radio tropes that bother me. The drama of it, the way that the action rises as the weeks come to a crescendo, and we go into the weekend and we wonder what's going to happen here or there. I'll actually miss some of the Mike Tomlinisms if I do back out, and I think I will. Just this past week, discussing why he put a tarp over a certain part of the Steelers practice field. Mike Tomlin said it was because of drones and so forth. He's worried about drones and other football teams spying on the team via that type of technology. As he put it, these are interesting times that we live in. So I'll miss some of the Mike Tomlin bluster in that way, just from an entertainment standpoint. But you know what? I don't think I'm going to miss it that much. And I wonder if some of you out there have already backed out of the whole football thing, whether it be college football, and I haven't even touched upon the whole hypocrisy of big-time college football, just a little bit with the Urban Meyer situation. But obviously these schools or these institutions of higher learning are emphasizing a sport and emphasizing big business in that way over everything else, over their integrity and their reputation in the community among those who are not football fanatics. I realize non-football fans might be harder to find in a place like Columbus, Ohio, or State College, Pennsylvania, as we've seen with the Joe Paterno situation, the Jerry Sandusky situation. But football can blind people to real-life problems, and it can make all of us rather short-sighted and forget about victims in certain cases, whether it be out at Penn State or Courtney Smith, if you find her believable with her accusations of her husband who used to work under Urban Meyer. These are all ugly aspects of football and ways that make me say that this obsession, this football industrial complex has gotten too big for its own good. So I'm going to be a conscientious objector this fall. And let me know in the comments on Facebook or on Twitter if you think I'm crazy, if you think I'm just picking on football as an easy target, if maybe you are right along with me and you want to try it, or perhaps you've backed out and you've opted out on football. It'll be an interesting experiment, to say the least, and I'm looking forward to seeing how vigilant and how successful I can be in taking a step back from it. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge. In just a moment, a special surprise guest relating to what's coming up next week, at least in my life, as I mentioned, taking a trip out of the country, going overseas. And, we'll see if my special surprise guest is available, number one, and number two, if she is willing to talk. Keep it right here on the River's Edge, coming to you from Millvale and Mr. Small's Theater.
You didn't wash your hands! People who do not wash their hands should be fined. And I'm sorry, I don't know about all of you, but if you're gonna castrate me, you might as well just kill me! So enjoy your hot dog, you jackass!
Get Educated with Brian Crawford, live Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m. here on the River's Edge.
Back for the second period of Gike's Got Game. Welcome to Millvale, Pennsylvania, where apparently there is a boil order on the water, and, I just took a drink from the tap water here. My engineer and producer, Tyler Zelenko, informed me of that. So, Tyler, you may have saved me a very painful overseas flight this evening. I'm getting on a plane in about 8 hours' time. So, hopefully that little sip I had doesn't affect anything. And if so, I apologize to everyone on Condor Airlines, and especially my seatmate, my roommate, who is on the phone right now, special guest, appearing now for the first time on Gike's Got Game since she was very pregnant with our almost 2-year-old son, Lucas. She is Jillian Gike. She is my wife. She's coming to you from just up the road in Westview, from her home office, where I'm interrupting her work time. And there's Lucas in the background. Jillian, how are things going? It sounds rather busy over there.
Yes, Lucas is terrorizing the office as we speak with puzzle pieces everywhere.
Well, welcome to the show. I told you were coming on at about 9:40, so thanks for adjusting. That is all part of it. I didn't want you to prepare for too long. So are you concerned about the water I just drank here?
No, as long as it was only a sip or two.
Yeah, we should be okay, I suppose. Are you nervous about the jet lag? Because I know that's something that bothers me. I think the first day is going to be a complete wash over there. I hope it's not, but...
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure we did a little bit of an upgrade, so we have more of a reclined seat. So I'm hoping that we sleep better on the plane. And from a few long days this week, I'm pretty exhausted, so I think I'll cash out quickly.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'm not one to sleep on planes or cars or anything like that, but maybe I'll be tired enough. That'll be the idea here. So we were talking about football, Jillian, in the first segment, and I know you as a University of Michigan fan have a vested interest on the Urban Meyer scenario out in Columbus at Ohio State. But that's all part of the reason why, or that's just one of the reasons why I'm seriously considering just opting out on football, college and professional, and high school for that matter, this fall. I don't think we've watched a lot of it recently. You're more of a college football person than I am. I'm more of a pro football person. It's just a factor of where we grew up. You were growing up in Michigan. I grew up around here. But what do you think about just generally football's place in culture, do you think it's too big? Do you think that maybe we could all take a step back and stop being so obsessed with it?
Yeah, so whenever I go somewhere and people are like, "Oh, you're from Pittsburgh, you must be a Steelers fan," I'm quick to correct them. No, I am not. I am not a large fan of the NFL. I do follow the Patriots only because of Tom Brady going to Michigan.
Makes you such a big, popular figure here in town.
Yes, but if I never watched football on Sundays, I would be completely fine. Now, giving up college football may be a little bit difficult. I don't watch every week when Michigan is playing, but definitely for the big games against Michigan State and Ohio State.
Now, I would argue that college football, at least big-time college football, is worse than the NFL. At least in the NFL, the players get paid and they get compensated in some way for putting their bodies and brains on the line. In college football, they get a scholarship that may or may not help them get a job after this, and that's about it. And Lucas seems upset about college football in general. He's not playing football, I know that much. We can agree on that.
No.
But yeah, what do you think about that? I feel like college football is worse in many ways than pro football.
I don't know. I'm back and forth on college athletes being paid. I know the percentage of them actually playing after is very small, but that's a choice that they have made for why they want to go to a particular school. And so I think that is just part of their college experience, where you and I go to college for academics or maybe academic programs. They have made their decision to go to college for football, and so that's just one of the consequences. Now, coaches being paid millions of dollars, I don't agree with at all. I am in a company that does student lending, and I know that the college costs keep rising, yet these football coaches are paid a lot of money, most of which comes from revenue and donors, but I would rather that money go to decreasing tuition for these students so they're not in debt the rest of their life.
I'm not sure it's the case in Ohio with Urban Meyer, but I know in many states the college football coach or the football coach at the biggest state institution is the highest paid public employee in said state. So that is completely backwards, of course. And, well, it speaks to the capitalism of college football. Of course, all that money generated, not shared with the players. And that's where another problematic part of football comes in. And it's not something that I'm bringing up alone. It's been mentioned many times. And I think there's some momentum here behind at least sharing some of the wealth with the players in the so-called revenue sports like football and like men's basketball at the Division I levels. Now, with Lucas talking in the background there, it reminds me of my problems with high school football and youth football. And with people under the age of 18, Jillian, it feels like we should be protecting them from this. They should not be put in this situation. If you're over 18, you're a legal adult, okay, I could see you playing college football and endangering your bodies in that way. Should there be legislation against football for minors? Is the sport too dangerous in your mind, and now as a mother, for kids to play it, whether you be 10 or 17?
I think so. I mean, in hockey, they have a lot of parameters set up. Kids have the stop signs on the back, so they don't really encourage the pushing or the checking or anything. But in football, I mean, you go to these little kids' practices, and it's like the violence almost is ingrained in the sport. And so they see it on TV and think, okay, I'm going to just go over here and clock my friend on the football field. But they actually had a story this morning on the Today Show about how the numbers of youth playing football has been declining. And part of that is, the more awareness of concussions and the long-term effects that having it played can have on your body.
Do you think there is a safe sport out there? We often talk about what we will or will not allow Lucas to do when he grows up. And right now he loves whacking balls around the living room with golf clubs and hockey sticks. He loves kicking the ball. So he's clearly already a sports-minded individual at a young age. Is just football on the blacklist? Do you have any other sports that you would prefer him not play, you think?
I know that you're in hockey. I think if he plays hockey, maybe wait a little bit. I'm all about, I love baseball. I think baseball is a great sport for kids. They're very rarely injured. So besides, individual sports like tennis and golf, soccer, I played, you played. I'm not sure what they do at the youth level now as far as, running into players or heading the ball. There's a lot of studies that show, at least for women, heading the ball can have a lot of serious consequences as well. So yeah. I think we'll just have to wait and see what he's interested in. But I think right now, anything that has a ball and he can throw or kick, he's interested in. So
might be all the sports that he watches with mom and dad on TV, I think, during the day, or grandma in some cases, leaving the tennis on all day, as we've seen over the course of summer and the U.S. Open coming up. So that might be happening this weekend, in fact, while we are out of town. Now, last thing for you before I let you go, and thanks again, because I know it's 10 minutes is a lot of time to give when you have a little tight running around and actually trying to do some work before you leave. What are you looking forward to with this trip? Like I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to Germany, we're going to Austria, Poland, Hungary, a little bit of Slovakia. So, throw sports out of the equation here. I like to talk about life, too, on this program. What appeals to you about just travel, and especially overseas travel?
So I guess what is most exciting is to have time, just the two of us. We love our son, but we don't really get a lot of date nights, so it'll be like 10 straight days of date nights and date days. And then also just seeing some of our friends over there that we're going to be connecting with. There's so much history in Europe. We come and think, oh, this building is old in Pittsburgh, and then you go over to Europe and it's hundreds of years old and everything. So just seeing the different cultures and trying out new foods and everything. So it'll be a busy, fun-filled adventure, but looking forward to it.
Well, it all begins tonight, and, well, thanks for taking some time out of your preparation. And like I said, I love you and I appreciate you. And I'll see you in a few minutes, I suppose, once I get home. And I'll have to start packing. Folks, I haven't started packing at all yet, so, yeah, 10-day trip, I probably should get on that when I return home. Thanks, babe. Good to talk to you. Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That is my wife, Jillian, and you heard Lucas in the background, too. Special surprise guest, a little bit of a surprise. I gave her an hour's notice, all right, or 40 minutes notice when I left the house, and I was planning on this being a solo show, but then I thought, hey, we haven't spoken to the woman of the household, so to speak, in a while, since, like I said, the last time she was on was down at the Millvale Studios a few blocks away, and Lucas was still developing inside of her. I think it was just a week before he came out. It was late October of 2016. This is Gike's Got Game, and you just heard from a couple of Gikes. You heard from my brother, in fact, too, earlier in the month, so it is all in the family on this program, apparently. I'll be back for the third period, another edition of Matt on Media, as I discuss the continued advancement of a newer entity in sports media and how it's causing some drama and causing some disdain and some pushback from those in the traditional media. You may have guessed what I'm talking about, but I'll fill you in on the details and what I think about the whole situation, most importantly. This is my show. On the other side of this break, this is The River's Edge, found at riversedgepgh.com.
Hey, it's Mike Sasson. Guess what? You used to love us at 10. You're going to love us even more at 9. It's me. It's Alex. It's funniness. It's guests. It's all sorts of me yelling into microphones only 1 hour earlier. It's exactly what you need at 9 o'clock. It's like a shot of adrenaline. It's the Mike Sasson Show, now starting at 9 o'clock on Tuesday on the River's Edge, a new kind of radio.
Inside the Mr. Smalls Theater Studios, this is the River's Edge, and you can find us at riversedgepgh.com. You can also find it streaming on Facebook, on my page, Matt Gike Media, also on the River's Edge page. And a couple of comments from Ray Halushka. Thank you, Ray. I hope I'm pronouncing that name properly, and it's not Halushka, which reminds me of Halushki, and now suddenly I'm hungry as a good Polish boy. He was asking if we had time, being my wife and I, to visit Kladno and Prague in the Czech Republic, which the Traveling Jagers, which is the Jaromir Jagr fan group that dresses like him, of course, and wears mullets like him, of course. They visited, apparently, and loved the Czech Republic earlier this year, as you would predict. He says they're going back. We don't have time to go to the Czech Republic. Unfortunately, I would love to get there, but we have a friend who lives in Hungary, and we're able to stay with her, which is nice, free lodging, or at least close to free. So we're taking advantage of that. And evidently, we can only slip into Slovakia for a little bit of time, too. So I wanted to get a little deeper there into that part of Europe. Doesn't look like it's going to happen. So we'll have Austria, we'll have Poland, we'll have Slovakia and Hungary, and we'll leave Czech Republic on the table. And we'll have to check it out, get it on our next trip to Europe. Hopefully, I'd like to get back and see places like Greece and Italy and the Balkans. So maybe that can be doable at some point, perhaps for our 15th anniversary or somewhere along those lines. I've never been to Europe for work. At some point, I'm in hockey, I'm in soccer. You think at some point maybe if I rise to a high enough level, I will get an assignment over there. That would be terrific. But it wouldn't be like a sightseeing trip like this one. So I'll be able to knock out plenty of points of interest. I'll put it that way. Because we are visiting the Auschwitz Museum in Poland, too. So it's not all going to be fun and games over there. I want to go over there and appreciate the gravity of the Holocaust. And, of course, two of the bigger, most of the concentration camps from that era. I don't want to say most, but a couple of the bigger ones were in my home country of Poland. So we're taking advantage of that opportunity to go there and make it a holistic trip. So, yeah, it's not all sunshine and roses over there. And hopefully we're enriched by the experience, including that trip to Auschwitz and points all around Central Europe and a little bit into the eastern side of it. So that'll be terrific. And Ray, thanks for the comment. Someone else, who was it, Tom Kariotis, says, will you be scouting Polish hockey prospects for the Penguins? It'd be nice to see some more Polish hockey players in the NHL, right? We haven't seen that very often in the last several years. Krzysztof Oliwa, who was a goon, to put it kindly, or maybe not so kindly, in the NHL for many years, Devils most notably. He played for the Penguins near the end, about 15 years ago, before the full season lockout, I recall. And, of course, there was Mariusz Czerkowski of the Islanders. He was more of a scorer and more the type of player that you'd want young Polish hockey players to look up to. For whatever reason, though, Poland hasn't caught up with some of its neighbors, like the Czech Republic or Slovakia, or tiny Slovenia has done a lot better at hockey than Poland has, even though Poland has many more people in it. And one would imagine comparable resources at the very least to field a competitive hockey team. Belarus has done better than Poland, Ukraine, Latvia, for goodness sake, another tiny country. And then, of course, all the Scandinavian nations, even Germany right next door, too, on the other side. So I don't know why Poland's been a black hole of hockey. Personally, I love it, and I have the Polish heritage, so I would really treasure seeing someone come up from the Polish ranks and be able to crack into the NHL or even the AHL. I don't even know how many players are in the AHL or in American pro hockey, the ECHL included, who come from Poland. I have to imagine it's not very many, just judging by the number of guys who have made it to the top level over the years. So, no, I will not be scouting, but maybe I should. Maybe if I stumble upon some rink, I'll be able to watch a little bit of some random summertime scrimmage. At any rate, it's time to move on to the Matt on Media segment of Gike's Got Game, a semi-recurring segment. In fact, this is just the second time I've done it, but it's really a fascinating time in sports media, and not just for someone like me who's dabbling in different areas, writing, broadcasting, calling games, PR now, working for Robert Morris again, and helping to promote their men's hockey team and women's lacrosse team, and really all their athletic programs over there in Moon Township. So I've seen it from various angles, independent reporting, of course, with DK Pittsburgh Sports and Pittsburgh Hockey Now, and Pirates prospects over the course of this summer. I just wrote my last column for them this week. So I've seen it from all angles. So I'm not just saying it because of that, because you can bounce back and forth, because the careers in some instances, especially on the independent side, are less stable, so you get some bouncing around. I've had some comments, boy, you people change jobs quite a bit. Well, I'd rather not, right? I'd rather find something that I really love and that I feel is, carrying that necessary stability for someone like myself who's trying to help support a family here. So that's all part of the reason why, in some ways, working in college athletic departments is more appealing to me than independent media. But in the world of independent media, there is a usurper. There's a pretender to the crown, or maybe a contender to the crown, in the case of The Athletic. And I'm a subscriber to The Athletic. It provides both national and local sports news and analysis. I think it's fantastic. And for the amount I'm paying per month, it's a smorgasbord of content. I feel about The Athletic the same way I feel about ESPN Plus, the streaming video platform on ESPN.com. And I only subscribed to it, or I only started to subscribe to it, because the Riverhounds broadcasts that I do are all on ESPN Plus. So I wanted to go back and watch after the fact and see how I did and do some self-critiques. But the content there is out of this world. So a lot of times I feel like it's the best time ever to be a sports fan, because the price isn't that much, and you can really just almost disconnect from legacy media and follow sports via ESPN Plus if you want to talk about TV production, and The Athletic if you want to talk about writing. I don't think there's a better place to go for national or continental content if you talk about hockey, because Canada's included, of course, and local content. I don't think you can go wrong with a place like The Athletic. But there has been some pushback as The Athletic has stolen jobs, or stolen, I don't want to say jobs, they've stolen people, or they've poached people, maybe that's the better verb, from newspapers especially. And we've seen that here in Pittsburgh. And in the case of, DK Pittsburgh Sports here, where I used to work, my colleagues Josh Yohe and Mark Cabali went to work for The Athletic Pittsburgh. Same deal with Seth Rorabaugh, former colleague of mine at DK Pittsburgh Sports. Then you saw Rob Beertemple of the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review jump from the Tribune-Review to The Athletic to cover the Pirates. So it's happened here in Pittsburgh. It's happened across the nation, where other entities, especially legacy entities, and when I say legacy, I'm talking about traditional media, newspapers, radio stations, TV stations. But in the case of the newspapers, and whether you're talking about in their traditional form, in actual print or online, they've seen sports reporters jump to The Athletic because The Athletic's paying better. I know that personally from talking to people who work for The Athletic. It was a big pay raise, and they're backed by venture capital, so there is a risk being taken there as to the long-term stability of something like The Athletic. But when you have a subscription service, you only need so many subscriptions, as opposed to someone buying these things, someone buying content ad hoc, just on a case-by-case basis. When you get the subscribers and that steady income that comes over the course of a year or 3 years or longer, then you can plan and you can have that extra stability in the business. Neither here nor there, though, because we saw, for instance, there's a columnist and a former reporter for the Raleigh News and Observer in North Carolina named Luke DeCock, and he wrote about how he turned down The Athletic and why he feels like it's important to support local newspapers, and why it's important for people like him who have a following in sports to stay with newspapers, because, of course, newspapers cover actual news, not just sports, not just what many would consider to be frivolous things. That a lot of us who follow sport don't feel they're frivolous, but we also, at least most of us, understand that news and covering local politics, local government, that's all so important at these local levels, especially small markets. There's no other check on the power of local governments, or there are very few checks on the power of local governments without local media checking in. And in the case of national government, too, a free press is critical to a functioning democratic society, because the journalists do what those of us who are not in covering the news can't do. We can't devote all of our time to going to city council meetings, to going to White House press briefings, to take it to the extreme on the publicity scale. We don't have time to do that. We can't ask these questions directly, and we can't put government practices and public practices under the magnifying glass. We can't critique these certain things because we have our own lives and our own jobs to do, and we can vote and we can be informed, but journalists are there to do those jobs for us. And the fact of the business of newspapers is that sports people, the sports coverage, generates a lot of the advertising revenue that helps keep the news entities, the news operations, in business. So when someone like Luke DeCock says no thanks to The Athletic, I kind of applaud that from my side of it. And as he wrote, he feels like newspapers, and I don't even know if we're going to call them newspapers anymore, call them local news entities in that way, because they're mostly online, or more online than they were in print. You can find more content online than you can in print these days. But throwing that out to the side, and we can talk about that in the future if we want. But just talking about local news entities, we need them to subsist and thrive, really, in order to have a functioning democracy. And if all of these popular sports figures, these popular sports personalities, continue their exodus away from the local news entities, then I fear that the local news entities will have their news operations suffer. And I don't fear that. We've seen that already in certain spots. And I think it's something that's worth considering if you are a person who has a decent following in sports media, and something like The Athletic comes along and says, hey, why don't you come work for us? Well, perhaps Luke DeCock's statement, perhaps what he went through mentally in his decision-making process should be something that all of you go through if you do have that situation. I have not had that situation. I was not approached by The Athletic, just to be clear. But it's going to happen more and more as The Athletic, it appears, has aggressive expansion plans, and their leaders, their leadership has even expressed publicly that they want to make life difficult for newspapers. And I know what they were saying when they said that. It was more they feel like capitalism, they feel like the consumer is better served when there is more competition. I don't disagree with that. And as Adam Handelsman, one of their leaders, one of their you want to call him a general manager in terms of sports, you can call him that. But as he said today, they're really generating more jobs in sports media, because in a lot of cases, these newspapers are just calling people up from the minors, so to speak. They're bringing new people in as these more popular people perhaps leave and go to The Athletic. So it actually is generating new jobs, even though in some cases it's throwing sports coverage and news coverage in a lot of metropolitan areas into question and into some uncertainty. So The Athletic is definitely a disruptor. We talk about disruptors in business, and it's come to sports media in this way. Overall, I think it's a good thing, but I'm happy there are people who are taking a stand and saying, I'm going to stick with a local news outlet that actually covers news in addition to sports, because I feel like that's an integral part of the community. So it's not just a mass exodus. It's not like The Athletic has its pick of the litter in that way. And I hope that Luke DeCock, what he wrote this week in the Raleigh News-Observer, is absorbed by many people out there, because if it's just The Athletic dominating, then it isn't competition, right? And if it's just The Athletic dominating and taking all these revenue generators, if you want to put it that way, away from local news outlets, then I don't think the local consumer, the citizen of America, is served well. So something to consider. It's not just about sports in that way, because, like I said, sports drives the bus. People are very interested. People are very passionate about sports. And like I said in the opening segment, in the case of football, sometimes we can be too obsessed and too passionate, but we can also channel that passion in productive ways into, say, helping a local newspaper or a TV station or a radio station cover the news that needs to be covered, even though the news content may not have the audience of the sports content, and it definitely doesn't have the advertising pull of sports content. But it's still necessary, right? And there are some things that we need to continue to do, even if they aren't necessarily the most profitable things in the world. And that's what worries me really long-term about capitalism. And in this late stage of capitalism here, that's what worries me, is that these integral things like news coverage can fall by the wayside, because it's like eating your vegetables at the dinner table when you're a kid, or even when you're an adult right now. You may want to dig into the meat. You may want to dig into the dessert, or whatever. You may just want to have a beer, to speak of the adult scenario. But to make the body healthy, to fuel the body in a proper way, you need proper nutrients. And eating your vegetables, important both at the dinner table and when it comes to consuming media. And I hope we can all recognize that and take some time out to not just be obsessed with sports. I've been guilty of that over the years. I'm trying to wean myself off that. Perhaps weaning myself off of football will generate more time to be more civically minded. I feel like, since the election of Donald Trump, I have been. That was a wake-up call for me, definitely, that I need to pay more attention to things. But it could be something totally different for you. I don't mean to project my political opinions on you or my views on society on you, but I think all of us can do a better job, or at least most of us can do a better job of paying attention to the news. And in some ways, that means supporting the local news entities maybe even when you would think that subscribing to The Athletic would be a better expenditure. That would be more entertaining. That would be more fun. That would be a better diversion. But we can get too tied up in making our diversions better instead of focusing on the very important things in life. And like I said, in the realm of media, that is news first and foremost. And news remains the most critically important thing to keeping our democracy healthy. So I'll step off the bully pulpit here. I'll jump down from the soapbox and say goodbye for another week here on Gike's Got Game. That was Matt on media. The Athletic is good, but we need that competition from both sides. Good to have the competition with The Athletic in there, but we need that pushback from legacy media. That is my conclusion, at least, for this week. And like I said, I will not be back in studio next Friday, so I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. First full week of September after Labor Day. Hope you have a great holiday. And, well, I will hope to be a better and different person when I return from my vacation over in Europe. That's what we all hope for, right? We can be enriched by these experiences that we bring into our lives. And I'm glad to be part of this experience every week. Thank you for joining me every week if you do. And if this is your first time, I hope you jump back on. We'll have a rerun next week on the network, but in 2 weeks, a fresh edition of Gike's Got Game. For Tyler Zelenko, for my wife Jillian for joining me, for Brian Crawford and Sarah Kramer, the founders of the Feast here at the River's Edge, this is Matt Gike reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. Talk to you in 2 weeks. God bless. Have a great time and have an awesome weekend.